Oh, well, thank you. Thanks very much. It's nice to be here. I see some familiar faces, I think, in the room, which is great. Look, I wanted to start by asking something. How many of you are thinking about leaving some place to build something? A job, a career, a comfortable path someone else mapped out for you. Because that's where this story begins. In 2019, I walked away from a 20-year career as a finance lawyer. Not a bad career, a genuinely good one. Partner at White & Case, founding partner of the London office of Ropes & Gray, an equity partner at Jones Day. I'd advised investment banks, sovereign wealth funds, private equity funds on some of the most complex capital transactions in the market. I was, by any conventional measure, successful. And I was restless. Because there's a particular feeling that builds in a long career that no one warns you about. You become very good at advising other people about their problems, and at some point, usually quietly, something shifts. After years working inside a system that was built to generate revenues for others, I wanted to build something for myself. There was an entrepreneur hiding in an advisor's clothing, and I had kept him waiting really long enough. So in July 2019, I founded Avonhurst, a regulated advisory firm serving sophisticated capital providers. What does that mean? Well, that's today what we call private credit. Legal services, political advisory services, and capital solutions under one roof. We eliminated the billable hour as a metric. And this was all built before AI changed everything in legal services. And I remember the feeling of that moment very clearly. It wasn't fear, it was aliveness. After 20 years at being very good at someone else's game, I was finally playing my own. And like every founder, I went through the process. The pitches, the rejection, the meetings where you could see within 30 seconds whether the person across from you had already decided. And then finally, someone who understood what we were building. Someone who believed in the narrative enough to back it with capital. That feeling, when someone puts real money behind your vision, is unlike anything else. And the early signs were good. Our first client of the firm was one of the world's largest asset managers. We were shortlisted for industry awards. The trajectory was real. And I genuinely believed, that my background made me uniquely prepared for this. 20 years structuring capital transactions, I knew how institutions thought. I knew what capital structures looked like from the outside. What I did not know was how governance actually works when you're the founder inside it. That's not something a finance lawyer learns. I learned it the hard way. By 2023, I was no longer with the firm that I founded. I'm not going to dwell on the circumstances, but what I will tell you is about what happened next. Because nobody talks about that part. And I think it's that part that this room really needs to hear. When you build something and you walk away from it, the first thing you leave behind isn't the company. It's the narrative. For 20 years, I had a story about who I was. It was written in job titles, in firm names, in deal tombstones. It was legible to anybody in my world. I didn't have to explain it. I just handed the card over and people knew where to place me. And then, suddenly, I didn't have it. I remember going to events, the kind I've attended for decades, and feeling for the first time I didn't know how to answer the question that everybody asks within 30 seconds of meeting you. What do you do? I had spent my entire career never once being uncertain about that answer. Now I was. And what I discovered in that period, and this is something I believe deeply, is that we confuse identity with achievement in ways we do not fully understand until achievement is gone. The title wasn't just a title. It was a proxy for self-worth, belonging, legibility in a world that sorts people very quickly. That exit did not just change my circumstances. It changed how I saw myself, and it changed how I saw the people around me. The calls that stopped being returned. The people I had spoken to daily who, when I was no longer a founder and CEO, no longer seemed to find the time. Not necessarily because they were bad people, but I had been useful to them. And when that utility ended, so did the relationship. It took losing those connections to understand they had never really been connections at all. They were transactions with a social surface. And that was a painful realization, but also an incredibly clarifying one. Because what remained, the people who called anyway, who showed up when there was absolutely nothing for them to gain, that was the real inventory. And it was smaller than I expected, but more valuable than anything that was in any deal sheet. And I suspect some of you already feel the pull of this sense that your value is conditional on what comes next. That pressure is real, and it gets more complicated, not less, as your career advances. But here's what I also discovered. That period, uncomfortable, disorienting, occasionally brutal, was the most creatively productive of my life. Because when the scaffolding comes down, you find out what's actually underneath. And what I found was something I hadn't expected: time, clarity, freedom to think. I started consulting, speaking with founders and entrepreneurs, and I began telling them my story. And I kept hearing the same thing back to me over and over again, which was this: the same thing happened to me. And that's when I realized different industries, different businesses, the same result. I realized it was not personal, it was systemic. So I did what I know how to do. I interviewed founders. I spoke with investors. I did the research, and I extracted the lessons. Everybody knows the garage to IPO story. I wanted to tell the one that nobody talks about. I wanted to help future founders and investors avoid going through what I went through. So I wrote Blindspots. And the thing I kept returning to, the central observation, the whole book is built around, is this. The most important risks that founders face are almost never operational. Founders are extraordinary at solving operational problems. Product, people, growth, those are the problems you think about, talk about, and optimize for. But the risks that quietly transfer control, that activate in a crisis, that produce outcomes nobody anticipated, those are structural. They sit in governance documents, shareholders' agreements, board compositions that were finalized in moments of optimism and never revisited. And they are invisible until they are not. That is a blind spot. And it's not unique to me. More than half of all venture-backed CEOs are gone within 4 years. Not because their businesses fail, but because the structures allow it. And there are 3 reasons why very smart, very experienced founders miss this until it is too late. The first is what I call the gratitude trap. When someone finally says yes to your vision, after all the rejection and uncertainty, it becomes very hard to negotiate for protections you hope you will never need. You're signing out of gratitude, not protection. And gratitude is not a reliable guide to structural decision making. The second is the intelligence paradox. A lot of founders think, I am smart, I have good advisors, this will never happen to me. But the smarter you are, the better you are at explaining away the warning signs. Intelligence can make you overconfident in your ability to read the room. And the third is what I call institutional asymmetry. Your investors have done 50, 100, 200 deals. You're a first-time founder, you've done none, 1, maybe 2. They have playbooks. You have optimism. This isn't a fair fight, and you don't even realize the game has started. And I had all 3 working against me at once. I had counsel, good counsel, I thought. She told me my agreement was market, and it was. But market and fair are not the same thing. And I didn't really appreciate the distinction until much later. What I also didn't appreciate, and this is something I think every founder in this room needs to understand and really think about, is that my counsel wasn't ever really my counsel at all. In the early days, I was the company, and she represented the company. I assumed that meant she really represented me. But when the capital came in, her loyalty shifted. Not through bad faith, through structure. The company's interests and my interests had quietly diverged. And the person I thought was in my corner was bound to follow the entity, not the founder. That's not a criticism of her. That's just how it works. But nobody really talked to me about how it worked. And here's what's harder still. Control rarely disappears in a dramatic moment. It erodes incrementally. One provision, one board appointment, one missed quarter, Each one feels manageable in isolation, but stack enough of them together, and when pressure arrives, everything activates at once. And to be clear, the documents don't change. The context does. And when the context changes, the meanings of those documents changes with it. So, what is the lesson for the room? Not that you shouldn't build. Please build. The world needs people like the people in this room to build things. Not that you should be paranoid. Paranoia is just fear with better PR. The lesson is simpler than that. Understand the structures you are agreeing to before you need them to protect you. Ask the question that nobody asks in the optimistic days. What happens if this does not go according to plan? Not because it won't, but because the answer to that question is written into every document you sign. And the time to read it carefully is before you sign it, not after you need it. I know this because it happened to me. I had spent 20 years structuring these documents. I understood the clauses. I understood the mechanics. What I didn't understand is how those provisions would feel when they activated. This isn't something you learn as a lawyer. You only learn it from the inside. And nobody explained it to me from that side. I signed in a room full of people who believed in me. And belief is a powerful anesthetic. It dulls the questions you should be asking. It makes caution feel like ingratitude. It makes structure feel like a relationship. Until it doesn't. The leap, leaving the comfortable path, backing yourself, building something from nothing, that feeling is real and it is worth chasing. But the leap is only half of it. The landing is shaped by decisions you make before you jump. Most founders spend everything preparing for the leap. Very few prepare for where they will land. So what does preparing for the landing actually mean? It looks like asking questions that feel unnecessary when everything is going well. Who controls decisions if my investors' priorities change? What happens to my position if we need an emergency round? If this relationship deteriorates, which side does the document favor? It looks like understanding that the best time to negotiate protection is before you ever need it. When you have leverage, when everyone is still friendly, when the room still believes in you. Because once pressure arrives, those conversations are no longer negotiations. They are the structure doing what it was always capable of doing. So what I'd say is see the structure clearly, build with that clarity. And if you do, if you understand the game you are actually playing, not just the one you think you are playing, take the leap, but prepare for the landing. Build something that lasts, not just something that starts.